I'll let you know whenever we're ready to go.
Okay.
So Dave can't talk to us? Is that,
What's that again?
Dave cannot talk to us?
Is he still stuck out? Is that still a problem for him, Jim?
It is, but it's okay.
Okay.
Well, his computer is a Commodore 64, which we haven't seen since Happy Days went off the air.
That's right. So what's the real problem with it? Do we know?
There's a microphone driver that needs to be fixed.
Ah, well, that would explain it.
All right, we are good to go. I'm going to do this.
And Arch, since they know you, I'm not really going to spend any time introducing you. When you're ready to rock and roll, go ahead and rock and roll.
That would be Jen, correct?
Yes,
Yeah.
but 2 seconds.
Oh, he can hear us because I'm getting messages from Dave.
Okay.
You know, Dave was at San Juan Hill. He was charging up San Juan Hill with Teddy Roosevelt, the Spanish-American War.
You wouldn't happen to be exaggerating again, would you?
Gene, never. And you know, I always speak the truth, and I'm an extremely serious, sober-minded person.
Good to go.
All right. Hold on a second. Is that your dog, Arch?
That's not my dog.
I'm looking to see who's.
It's mine.
Oh, okay. The man eater. All right. Oh, welcome back, teachers. Whenever you'd like to start, Arch, just give Jen the go.
We're good to go, Jen.
And now we're at the Memorial Arch on the other side of Valley Forge Park that was established in 1910. Originally, there was going to be 2 arches at this part of the park, and then on the other side, this is a model of the Arc de Triomphe in Rome that was established by the Roman Empire in 81 AD. If there are 2 openings in the arch, it represents either officers and emperors, or all officers or all emperors. And so this arch has 1 arch that signifies it's a memorial of Washington in the Army. And it's 60 feet high. And the reason the arch is here is because in front of me, coming up this Upper Gulf Road, is where Washington's army came into Valley Forge. And at this point, you can see the high ground, and as I'm walking toward, that's the cabin line. So when Washington came in here, his army came in behind me up on the Upper Gulf Road to this high point, and then Washington distributed the army that way towards Muhlenberg line, that way towards the Pennsylvania line, and then he established the inner line and then went down over the second valley to where we were at the headquarters. So the arch was designed by Congress, and there was supposed to be the Washington Arch and the von Steuben Arch. The Washington Arch was supposed to go down by Washington's headquarters. The other arch was supposed to go out to where the modern day visitor center is. But believe it or not, Congress said it cost too much money. They were $50,000 each. I can't understand, but Congress does not change. So Congress voted on both arches. The House passed it. The Senate voted it down. So 6 months later, they came back, and I still don't understand this. They're going to build 1 arch for $100,000 rather than 2 arches for $50,000 each. So Congress really doesn't change from time period to time period. So it was started in 1914 and it was dedicated by 1917. And it's dedicated to General Washington and the Army here. Before 9/11, you could drive around the arch on your automobile, and that's why it's cobblestone, and then you could park behind it. Now, since 9/11, they put up the barriers where you can only walk up here, or you can ride your bicycle up here and come to the arch. This is gorgeous at night. It is lit up. All the generals that were here are listed on the inside, and we'll go over to that. And then on the back side of the arch is the phrase that General Washington wrote to General Clinton about the troops here, that they were naked and starving, and yet the incomparable soldiery that he had here. He was begging for troops, he was begging for supplies, and he wrote that to General Clinton, the governor, or Governor Clinton of New York, and that's what's on the other side of the arch, on the outside. So this is where Washington came in. This is the one arch, and you can see this arch from all over the park that we go through. And this part of it was dedicated by the Masons. Washington was a Mason. So part of this monument and arch money was donated, or the cobblestone was donated by the Masons, because General Washington, President Washington, was a lifelong member of the Masons. As we go inside, you can see on either side the names of the generals and the officers that were here. All the major officers of the Revolution was here. Benedict Arnold finally gets here, and he's given another commission by General Washington, and then becomes the military governor of Philadelphia. So you can see the commander-in-chief, the major generals, Johann Cobb, General Greene, the Marquis de Lafayette, Charles Lee, General Mifflin, von Steuben, General William Sterling, Sullivan, who built the bridge, and then the brigadier generals underneath of them. And you can see some of those men are not Americans. They came here to help the American Army fight the revolution. So this is just phenomenal inside of this thing, and you can it just tells a whole story. And so much of this is in the design of 81 AD. This was designed by a man named Paul Felipe Cret. I believe I'm pronouncing his last name right. It's C-R-E-T. He was an architect. He was a professor at the University of Penn for 30 years. He built and composed many of the bridges in the area, many of the museums in Philadelphia, and if you've ever been out to Gettysburg, to the Eternal Light Monument out there on Oak Hill, he created that monument for the 75th anniversary of the Battle of Gettysburg. He is not born Philadelphian, he was born in France, but he lived most of his life here, and he was the architect for this monument. He is overlooked during the 1930s and 1940s in America because many of the German architects stole a lot of his patterns to create monuments and architectural for Nazi Germany. So he was not a Nazi and he wasn't German, but because they took so much of what he designed, he is oftentimes overlooked in American history because of Nazi Germany. But he created this, and it's just a phenomenal arch, and it looks a lot higher than it is. It's 60 feet high. But you can see this arch, particularly when it's winter, when there's no leaves on the trees, from all over the park. And at night, with the magnificent lights, you can see this lit up. And again, it represents, it's dedicated to General Washington and the army that was here, and Washington's characteristics of the army, that even though they were naked and starved, their character here to be able to continue for the cause of freedom is remained and remembered because of this arch.
Okay, again, if you have questions, feel free to send them through to the chat and I'll relay them to Arch. Wait a second. If there aren't any, then I'll go into the next video. But okay, Jen, why don't you just start the next video, and then that way, if questions come through, we can always do them with the next.
Okay, we're now at the Patriot of African Descent memorial that was placed here about 3 years ago. There was 700 African Americans that was part of the Continental Army here, and I said General Varner, when they came, they either freed slaves, free men, or they were slaves who were getting their freedom if they fought in the American Revolution. So this monument is dedicated to the African Americans that were here, and we see there was probably somewhere between 3,000 to 5,000 African Americans who fought for the Continental Army throughout the Revolution. And as an historian, many people ask me, particularly where we are in American history, are we rewriting a history? And I say, no, we're revealing more of our history. And as time goes on, because we believe that history is a study of human behavior, we're now being able to teach much more of our story, whether it's the women of the Revolution, African Americans in the Revolution, immigrants in the Revolution, and all throughout our history. So we're beginning to see more of our history, and we're beginning to pay much more attention to what we historians call bottom up of American history, and incorporating not just the founding fathers and these generals that we know, but everybody that was involved, particularly here at Valley Forge with the American Revolution. We know the first patriot killed was Crispus Attucks up in Boston, and we see even here Isaac and Hannah Till. They play tremendous roles in helping supply and feed the troops here. So when we look at our history, we have to remember that it's all of our history, and we just can't pick out certain parts of our history, whether it's the good parts or our warts in our history. We have to show it, reveal it, and teach it. So we're happy that a couple of years ago, this monument was dedicated to the African Americans that were here and the role that they played in the American Revolution, and then also the Native Americans that were here. We had about 500 Oneida Indians that were here during the winter encampment and also fought in Washington's Continental Army. So the monument was dedicated to all the patriots of the American Revolution that were African American descent, and we're very glad and we're very happy that now we're beginning to be able to look at that part of our history and incorporate that into our history, and particularly the story of our American Revolution.
So again, if there's questions, feel free to forward them. I'll wait a second before we turn to the Battle of Paoli.
Hey, Arch.
Yes.
I have one that was sent to me, and it says, why has it taken so long to gather the information about VF?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the last part of it. About
why has it taken so long to gather the information about VF?
the African Americans. And Jen, I believe because that's been one of our major problems throughout our history, is that for so long, we've only viewed our history from the top down. And so much of it from the bottom up has been overlooked and overshadowed, that only within the last 25 or 30 years that we've been really beginning to look at all of our American history, whether it's minorities or the women or immigrants. And it's just, which taken so long to do that. I know several weeks ago, the History Channel had on a program of General Grant, and only in the last hour did they deal with his presidency and that whole idea of the lost cause. And we as historians need to look at that, how all the thinking of the lost cause, and how so many Southern historians wrote so much of the history of the Civil War, and then perpetrated this feeling that it took us well over 100 years as we try to get through the issues from World War I and African Americans, and then the civil rights movement, where this is all now finally becoming more part of our history as we're getting that revealed and we're studying it.
Yeah, if I can jump in too, Arch, because I think this is an interesting part of the tale. And I don't know if you've ever met him, Arch, and I can't remember Joe's last name. I'm ashamed right now. He worked for years at Valley Forge National Park and Independence Independence Hall in that area. And he was one of the first, long-term African-American park rangers, and, did work. And I think both, some of our other speakers, both Nancy and I'm sorry,
Mike,
his first name went out of my head for a second, are great examples of this too, where, a lot of the initial work has come from people who were park rangers. And in this case, and again, I'm ashamed, I can't remember Joe's last name. But he did some of the first groundbreaking work on African-American revolutionary soldiers at Valley Forge. And worked a lot with a number of graveyards in the Philadelphia area related to African Americans who served in the Civil War, as well as the American Revolution. So there's an awful lot of this stuff to sort of be, sort of culled through and found, and neat stories that are might be local history, but important history. So
yeah, and Gene, that we say that to all our teachers that one of our desires for them is not to be history teachers, but to be historians, which means that we constantly need to be a lifelong learner and keep digging and digging and finding more and more out about our history, because so much of it we don't really know because of the sociological changes in America and what we have been through. I mean, that's a long answer to why it's taken so long to really look at the role of minorities, the role of the African Americans, the Oneida Indians, and the role of women in the American Revolution alone.
Yeah. Then I have a teacher asking regarding the video with the arch, is that all the park behind the arch? And I think maybe might be, interesting. Mike talked about this, or I'm sorry, Nancy talked about this, I think at a certain point, or you may have. No, you did the other day, but again, go over sort of the size and scope of the park. I mean, that, how big it is today, but how it's for lack of a better term, its true boundaries extend to, where I'm sitting right now.
Yeah. The park today is 3,400 acres, and my back and through the arch, it goes about 1.5 miles past me, up the hill where Wayne had the Pennsylvania line, and then down into the valleys. So geographically, the arch is somewhere right about in the middle of the whole park. If the teachers pull up the map that we sent them about the park, they could see the proximity of that arch. So it's just about a little bit probably to the left of center, but it's close to the center of the park.
Okay. All right. Why don't we start the Paoli video, please?
We are now on the Paoli battlefield, which most people call it either the Paoli Massacre or the Paoli Tavern Massacre. And this is a battle that most people overlook during the American Revolution. This was the 9th largest battle of the American Revolution. Also, Paoli Battlefield has the 2nd oldest Revolution monument on it, which we will see in a few minutes. But what gets us here is, remember, General Washington lost Brandywine, the Battle of the Clouds, which is on the campus of Immaculata College, which was south of here, got rained out. General Howe is now making a sweep north to northeast to try to get supplies from Washington's supply depots, and we already saw that he took the supply depots of Washington at Valley Forge. So Washington then goes to the north of Howe to hold on his supply at Reading, and the Reading was a major depot for the Continental Army. So as Howe is sweeping northeast, General Washington sends Anthony Wayne actually behind the British lines here at this point. So Anthony Wayne sets up his camp here to try to take the supply train of General Howe as he's moving. And the reason Anthony Wayne is here, one, because this is primarily his backyard. His home is about a mile in the opposite direction behind me. Anthony Wayne knows this area very, very well. And so he sets up here, and the other reason he sets up here is because this is the highest point in all of Chester County. Again, the importance of high ground. So when you look over my shoulder and you look out, you can see that Anthony Wayne has his men set up here behind General Howe's lines on the high ground. And the next day, on September 20th, Anthony Wayne has plans to attack the rear guard supply train of General Howe to get supplies. And that is a very, very important concept. Never outrun your supply lines. Napoleon said an army fights on its stomach. Never outrun your supply lines, and the Continental Army now virtually has no supplies except for in Reading, which Washington is on his way to try to protect, which he never got there. Anthony Wayne is going to attack the rear guard of the British Army to try to take their supplies from them. This is a very loyalist area. Unfortunately, Anthony Wayne's personality was not one that he was well liked by his neighbors. And I'm sure most of us have at least one neighbor that doesn't seem to get along with anybody, and it's always causing some sort of a commotion. Well, unfortunately, that was part of Anthony Wayne's personality. So in this area, Anthony Wayne was not a well-loved neighbor. He sets up out on the Griffith Farm, and I'll come back to that in a minute. This is actually part of the Brady Farm where the soldiers are buried. Farmer Griffith was a loyalist, and other loyalists in the area, so he's not happy that Wayne has 1,500 men encamped on his farmland. We don't know if it was Griffith or some of the other loyalists in the area went to General Howe, and they told General Howe that Anthony Wayne is here on this field, and they also gave the British Wayne's passwords so that they could get through the pickets and they could attack Anthony Wayne and get him off this land. Fortunately, a patriot came to Anthony Wayne the night before and told him that, and that the British were planning to attack him here and get him off the field. So for years and years and years, a lot of historians believed that Anthony Wayne's men were all sleeping here, and they purely snuck up on in the middle of the night, and they were butchered. And that is, we now know from John Andre's diary and more documents, that Anthony Wayne was fully aware that the British were going to attack him here. So the map, one of the maps that I gave you, you could see on the map that he has pickets. He sent pickets farther out into different Easttown and farther out into Paoli, and he set pickets out there because he believed he was going to be, he knew he was going to be attacked here. So during the night, General Howe sends General Charles Gray with about 1,000 men to come here and sneak up on Wayne's men. And we call Charles Gray No Flint Gray, because he told all his men to take their flint out of their muskets so that they wouldn't fire, and to fix bayonets. So again, remember, this is totally against military strategy. Military strategy in Europe is you line up shoulder to shoulder and you march forward. And you march forward. You don't sneak attack. You don't use guerrilla tactics from European strategy. But Gray was going to use that strategy here. So as he began to come closer to Wayne's pickets that you see on your map, 4, 5, and 6, two pickets came charging in here to tell Anthony Wayne that General Gray was coming and was going to attack him here. And that Wayne actually roused his men in the middle of the night and began to try to get them out of here. Picket number 4, which is the most important, which got 2 shots off to warn Wayne that he was about ready to be flanked by picket number 5. And that will make sense if you see that on the map. So picket number 5 is down the valley, down in the valley where the Paoli Tavern was, and they were going to flank Wayne. Fortunately, picket 4 got off warning shots. So as General Gray was moving his men into this area through the borough of Malvern, through that wooded area, and at the bottom of the wooded area, it's swamp. It's swamp. Wayne began to try to get his men off the field because he didn't know how many British were coming here. This is what we call a snake fence. This snake fence was here, and there was an opening, which you'll see in a minute, and the snake fences were made primarily for 2 reasons. 1, you didn't need to make posts and rails. 2, you could lay the fence rails out that way, and it's a lot easier. 3, some animals are not too smart, so when they come up to these snake fences, it confuses them of not being able to get around it, so they simply back away from it. Primarily cows and sheep. So this is a snake fence that was here, and in the middle there was an opening. And so Wayne's men are on the other side of the snake fence, out here in the long grass, out there in the swampy area, all along this wooded area to my left, as the British began to come here and sneak up on Wayne's men. So the British took out the pickets, and as they began to move in here, Wayne began to move out. And you think of this, and it's now 1:30 in the morning. Campfires are very bright. The British can see these campfires. And so as they come into this area, General Gray has his men use their bayonets to take out the soldiers, the Wayne's men that are primarily more out in that open area down there in the swamp. So Wayne loses 52 men that night to a bayonet charge at this point. And as he's moving his men off the field, he moves directly to his west in this direction, down into the Swedes Forge Road, because a mile behind him is General Smallwood with Marylanders that were supposed to reinforce him here. So Wayne's men just scatter and get out of here as quickly as possible.
Did that just freeze up, Jen, or is that the end of it?
It's
That was
frozen.
the end. No, that was the end.
That's
Okay.
the end.
Okay. All right, Arch. Question from a teacher. Given the size of the battle and the results, in your opinion, why is it not covered in more detail? I'm assuming in many books about the American Revolution.
Well, again, because of Brandywine. Brandywine overshadows. Brandywine is the largest battle in the whole American Revolution. And that's the original 9/11. And because this was much more of a skirmish, and I hate to say that because people are going to get upset with me in the Paoli area for calling it that, that Brandywine overshadows this, Germantown overshadows this, General Howe taking Philadelphia. After Brandywine, General Howe sent General Cornwallis right into Philadelphia, and Cornwallis walks into Philadelphia on September 26th. So Paoli is overlooked because of Brandywine, Germantown, Howe taking Philadelphia with General Cornwallis, and then the large winter encampment at Valley Forge. So, you know, this is, and Paoli is overlooked because of that. And that's another reason, Gene, that they called it the Paoli Massacre, was to cause great fervor in the colonists, particularly in this area, to support the revolution. Wayne is court-martialed and asked for a court-martial after this, and it's totally exonerated. So it's just one of those battles that's overlooked immensely from the revolution. Ironically, it's so overlooked that about 15 years ago, Malvern Prep, who owned this land, they were willing to sell it to a settler or to a developer and put homes on this piece of land. So fortunately, our congressman and the Revolution Preservation Trust was able to raise the money to buy this land. So even up until 15 years ago, even Paoli or Malvern Prep, who has one of the great Revolution historians, Thomas McGuire, totally overlooked this whole battle.
Mm-hmm. So then somebody asked, where did you read about the snake fences? Where
did I read in the snake fences?
How do you know about them? Where is it in terms of the records, that kind of thing? Because
well, the maps that they can find, if they go on a Paoli battlefield preservation, they can see the maps, the actual maps, and how the snake fences were there. Mm-hmm. And these fences are very common to Pennsylvania. Mm-hmm. And we see them all over Pennsylvania. So it's part of our Pennsylvania history about the snake fences all over. But you can look on the original maps. You can actually look on the Delgado painting, and you can see the snake fences in that also.
Okay, thank you. All right, Jen, let's roll the next one.
The reason this cannon is here with one wheel is because Wayne had 4 cannons that he was trying to move off the field through this opening. Unfortunately, one of the cannons lost the wheel and was right there. And so they had to get the cannon up, move it out of the way, which slowed Wayne's men from getting out of this area. This cannon has only been here for about 6 or 7 months now. And one of the board members, named Bart van Valkenburg, has built this cannon from scratch. Everything on that cannon he has handmade, which took him a little over 2 years to make this cannon. And then we put it out here about 6 months ago in dedication to the cannon with the wheel off. So that's the significance of that cannon with one wheel off. It had to be moved out of the way and discarded so the men could get out of here. This was a bloody mess. This was a very, very bloody mess. The next day when the farmers came back here, they write in their diaries that there was bodies and body parts and arms and heads all over these fields. 52 of Anthony Wayne's men were bayoneted to death. We believe, and there's a discrepancy in the numbers, probably around 140 of Anthony Wayne's men were killed, wounded because of this battle. So obviously the propagandists went to work right away, and they called this the Paoli Massacre, because to drum up support. Remember, this is not a patriot area. This is a very loyalist area, and the propagandists started to call this the Paoli Massacre. Wayne actually lost about 9% of his men. So technically, numbers-wise, it's not a massacre, but the propagandists went to work here. And the patriots in the area are now totally irate because of the tactic that General Gray used in bayoneting men. And many men, it's recorded, that surrendered. And Gray said, no quarter. No quarter. A man, you cannot just simply surrender and take you prisoner. We will bayonet you to death. 71 men were either taken prisoner out of Anthony Wayne's 1,400, were taken prisoner, and 40 of them were wounded, and most of those men still died from their wounds. So this bayonet charge that was here, this was just an awful mess the next day, and it was a very, very, very bloody mess, and it was very, very, very sobering the next day because the British vacate, Wayne gets most of his men out of here, and the next day when the farmers come in, they're the ones who have to bury the bodies. They're the ones that see all the blood and the body parts all over here. One soldier writes later on that he was surrounded by about 6 British soldiers, and they were poking at him with their bayonets and causing wounds on his body. And for some reason, he was able to get away from the British soldiers and run that way. The next day, a farmer found him in his barn that he had passed out from his wounds. Farmer took him in. He was still alive, took him into his home, took off his clothing, and because there was so much dried blood on his clothing, he literally could stand the clothing up. That gentleman had 41 bayonet wounds on his body. And for some reason, some miraculous reason, he was able to survive. Anthony Wayne, after this battle, was taken before Congress, and he was greatly criticized because he was not prepared here. Anthony Wayne was so irate at that, he demanded a court-martial. And again, he went through his court-martial, and when the court-martial was over, he was absolutely, totally exonerated for what he did here to save most of his men. It was not a dereliction of duty. Anthony Wayne was able to get most of his men out of here. They were not sleeping in the middle of the night. He was getting his men out of here when the British came and had this surprise attack. One lieutenant fled down into the swamp, and he jumped into the swamp in the middle of the night. His name was Sullivan. Sergeant Sullivan jumped into the swamp in the middle of the night to save himself from the British, and he didn't move all night long. And when the sun came up, he looked around, and there was 50 other of Wayne's soldiers in that swamp with him, and none of them knew it because they were so quiet that night, because what the British were doing here, and then the British under General Gray, they vacate and they reconnect with General Howe and General Musgraves up by the Paoli Tavern. So we call this the Paoli Massacre or the Paoli Battle because it's not in Paoli. It's in the borough of Malvern. But the British were down at the Paoli Tavern, which is no longer in existence. And that's where the plan really was formed, and that's where General Gray came from to ensue this conflict here. Paoli is named after the Corsican general Pasquale Paoli, as he tried to liberate Corsica from the French, and that's where we get the name for Paoli. So this is Malvern, this is the field. There's 40 acres here, and about 15 years ago, the preparatory school, Malvern Prep, needed money, and they were going to sell this 40 acres to a developer for $8 million. Unfortunately, the Revolution Civil War Trust, the Paoli Battlefield Preservation, and our local congressman was able to raise the money, $8 million, to preserve this field and this battlefield to what you see today. So you look around, and that's the wooded area. That's exactly the way it looked. The swamp area isn't behind me. down. Malvern isn't here. The fence line and farmers were all here. So the Wayne's men that were on the other side of this snake fence had to come through this area, and they scattered helter-skelter back down into the valley, where they finally caught up with General Smallwood's men of 1,000. That was the end, because the Marylanders had no military experience, and the British did not pursue them. And this is the night battle of September 20 into the morning of 21, the 9th largest battle of the Revolution, and a very, very bloody battle that caused the area, particularly the Patroness area, to become more intense of what the British were doing.
Okay. I don't have any questions, Arch. I don't know if you want to make any comments.
Make any comments?
Yeah, I said, I don't know whether, otherwise we'll go on to the next video, but I just,
Yeah, so about last year we had a professor from Kutztown University come out, and she's the only one in our area that has the GPR, the ground penetrating radar.
yeah.
And she had came out onto the field, and we spent about 9 hours with her out here seeing if there was anything else buried out in this field, and she found nothing.
Mhm.
So we're confident now there are no more bodies buried out there somewhere, or any cannon parts or anything left over from the battle.
Right. Which is a quick sidebar. For the teachers, I used to actually be department chair of history and political science at Immaculata, which Arch mentions. And they're related to the Battle of the Clouds, often involved with building repair. We would find cannonballs and bayonets and belt buckles, and there apparently is a fair amount still out there. But anyhow, Jen, if you could do the next one, please.
What we're looking at here is the grave site of 52 of Wayne's men that were killed out on the battlefield. And there's a reason there's a hump, because this is 52 graves here, and the men are buried underneath, and there's two men that goes all the way down through the end of the fence. Originally, this was a wrought iron fence like this one, and the obelisk that you'll see in a few minutes that was erected here on the 100th anniversary was also here. This is the original obelisk. This is the second oldest monument, that I said, of the Revolution. It was put up here in 1807, and you can see that it greatly began to deteriorate because of the weather, and you can see chips off of it because a lot of Americans wanted a piece of it as a memorial. So they encased it in to preserve it. Then they, for 100th anniversary, built the larger obelisk that has been moved, that you will see in a few minutes. On that obelisk, you'll see that 53 Americans are buried here. 52 are in this grave site. Finally, after about 4 years, they discovered that down in the wooded area was one of Anthony Wayne's soldiers that had been killed and put in a very shallow grave down there. And so that soldier, whomever that is, and we don't know their name, is down in the woods. So there's 52 here, and there's one more down in the woods, in an unmarked grave down in the woods. These cannons are actual naval cannons, and they were placed here many years after the battle when they made this into a park. These are naval cannons, and the reason they're here is because they're from one of the local iron forges. This is from the Warwick Forge. And so after the Revolution's over, we really don't have much need for the extra naval cannons. They were brought here because it's from one of the local iron forges, the Warwick Forge. So we see that these graves are hallowed ground, and people can come and look at the mound that's inside of these graves, And the obelisk that was here, the original obelisk has not, it's always been there, and it's hard to read the writing on it now, and it says it was erected in 1807. It is the second oldest Revolution memorial. Ask your students, what is the first memorial? And it's a great trivia question to ask them. So 52 are buried here of Anthony Wayne's men. One is down into the wooded area, and there are walking paths all along the wooded area, down into the swamp, and then back up this area that you can walk. Again, hallowed ground. The Paoli battle is one of the battles that was greatly overlooked because of what else went on in Yorktown and Valley Forge and these other massive battles. But this was a very, very important battle that Wayne was able to survive, his men were able to survive, and then we see what Wayne was able to do at Valley Forge, and then in his military career after Valley Forge.
Okay, Arch, there's a question here. Did the Loyalists change sides after seeing the results of General Gray's actions?
No, no, they did not. And again, because by this point, Patriots had pretty much vacated the area because the British had come through here.
Mm-hmm.
And also, as I stated at Valley Forge, Jane, this was also a very large Quaker area. So between the Loyalists and the Quakers, it's a very difficult area for Washington to ever get supplies for or to get support from the Philadelphia area, particularly now that the British have come in here. So the Patriots will always flee from the army that you're fighting, and the Loyalists will stand up. And so very little changed here after this battle because of what happened here. And again, time was moving so quickly, and the British, this massively large British army, which was about 26,000 in this area, and also going into Philadelphia, no one's really thinking at this point, am I going to change sides? They're thinking about, can I live or can I be protected from the British?
Okay, thank you. All right, let's roll the next one.
Okay, this is the most recent obelisk. It was put here in 1877 for the 100th anniversary to replace the smaller obelisk that we saw over in the gravesite. And originally it was over by the gravesite, at the end of the gravesite, and then several years later they moved it over here so that you could see it as you drove in. So this is the area over here where Wayne took his men out of here, and he vacated his men to my left, straight through that area over there, and then caught up with General Smallwood's Marylanders down the road about a mile. So this monument is dedicated to all the soldiers that died here, or were wounded here, or the few that actually survived here. And it's dedicated to the Paoli battlefield that was put here by the Malvern Borough for the 100th anniversary of the Battle of Paoli.
Okay. One question someone asked, are the names of Wayne's soldiers known today?
Some of them are, particularly the fourth regiment, because that was primarily, Gene, the soldiers from that area. Mm-hmm. And you can literally go on the Valley Forge website and you can pull up the different regiments and the muster rolls, and you can see their names listed.
Mhm.
So because there was very good records kept, particularly with the militias, because they would come and they would go, simply go on the Valley Forge website and pull up their muster rolls, and you could, all the names of the soldiers are listed there, where if they died during a battle, or their death when they died.
Okay, thank you. All right, if we could roll the next one, Jen?
We are now at the home of General Anthony Wayne, which his family called Waynesboro. And this is the original building that he was born and raised in. His grandfather came to America many, many years before, settled in this area, and General Wayne's grandfather came to America with my great uncle, John Hunter, and they were lifelong friends. And the Waynes are buried in Episcopal Cemetery over in Radnor, and many of my relatives, the Hunter side, are buried right next to the Waynes. There are 14 different places in America that are named after General Anthony Wayne, from here in Georgia and Indiana and Ohio. And General Anthony Wayne is probably the general that is most overlooked in this revolution. In World War II, General Eisenhower had Patton. In the Civil War, General Grant had Sherman. And in this war, Washington had General Anthony Wayne. He was a tremendous general. He was a tremendous fighter, and he won many, many battles. It's very important to see the positioning of generals. If you're on the left, you have the honor. If you're in the middle during an attack, the higher ranking generals know that you are confident to fight a battle. And at Brandywine, Anthony Wayne is right in the middle of Washington's lines. At Germantown, Anthony Wayne is on the left. And you can see throughout the war that Anthony Wayne had a tremendous amount of respect as a fighting general. Most people know him as Mad Anthony Wayne. And it's not because of his anger. It was because of his intensity. And at Paoli, we see what happened there. The next year, he led the attack at Stony Point up in New York along the Hudson. And he led a midnight attack with bayonets on a British encampment there. And all of his men were yelling, "Remember Paoli, remember Paoli." And after that success of Anthony Wayne, he was given a medal, congressional medal, because of what he did there. Anthony Wayne had a very, very unique career. He was in the Pennsylvania State Legislature. Then later on, after the war, he was elected to Congress from the state of Georgia, but only served a few months because the Election Commission said he wasn't a citizen of Georgia long enough, so he had to give up his seat. He also came back here after the war and tried to renovate Waynesboro and bring it back to life because it had fallen pretty much into disrepair during the Revolution. After Saratoga at Fort Ticonderoga, Anthony Wayne was set there to man Fort Ticonderoga. So Wayne had many, many successes in the war. After he was sent to the South, he really led the attack at the Battle of the Green Springs to hold General Cornwallis in Yorktown so that when Washington got there with Rochambeau, Cornwallis could not leave. After Yorktown, Anthony Wayne went all over the South to try to clean up the different skirmishes that were going on in the South, which he did. And after the war was over, Anthony Wayne spent 3 years of his life trying to get all the disenfranchised citizens of Georgia back their voting rights, their land rights, with the same time that he was very, very cautious that they all had to pay their taxes. But this is what Anthony Wayne did. He was given a plantation, and he lived for several years in the plantation in Georgia. Finally, he couldn't make any money there, so he sold it, and he came back to this area. Many years later, after Arthur St. Clair lost the Battle of Wabash out in the Northwest, it was a very critical time in our young nation's history. President Washington recalled Anthony Wayne to military service. Wayne went out to the western part of Pennsylvania, and for 2 years he raised troops and he trained troops and he supplied his troops because they needed to fight one more battle. So after 2 years of Wayne training his men, which he called the Legion of the United States, which was the beginning of our modern army, he had the Battle of the Fallen Timbers, which lasted about an hour. And he won the Battle of the Fallen Timbers against the Native Americans out in the Ohio River Valley. Also, when he was out there, Anthony Wayne had the largest wooden fort built in America, which he called Fort Greenville, honored after Nathaniel Greene, and he used that as a staging fort to win the Battle of the Fallen Timbers. So Wayne's career is very long, it's very illustrious. You can read about Anthony Wayne's personal life because he had a lot of warts in his personality, but we want to look at his military career, and he was truly one of the very, very successful generals of the American Revolution, and then what he did out there at the Battle of the Fallen Timbers. He only lives 2 more years. He dies in 1794 at the age of 51. And he dies out by Erie. He dies from gout at the age of 51. He is buried out there, and for 14 years, he's buried out in the area of Erie, Pennsylvania. His family wants him back here. His son Isaac wants him buried over in the Episcopal Cemetery in Radnor. So Isaac went out to Erie, and Erie would not give up the remains of Anthony Wayne. They wanted to keep him. So, as most Americans do, there was a lawsuit, and then there was a compromise. So they dug up Anthony Wayne after being buried for 14 years. His body was still intact, except for a little bit on his right leg that had deteriorated. So they didn't know what to do because there was so much flesh on the skeleton. So what they did is they cut up his body and put it in a big copper pot, boiled water, boiled the flesh off the body, reburied his flesh, and then brought his bones back here to be buried in the St. David's Episcopal Cemetery. So Wayne is actually the first American general that's buried in 2 locations. So these stories you can't make up about Anthony Wayne and his life, but this is a phenomenal fighting general who was very successful in every area. And look at the battles that Wayne fought and see his positioning and see where his positioning was in the battle. And you'll see the confidence that General Washington had in Wayne. At Monmouth County, when Charles Lee decided he didn't really want to fight and was withdrawing his men, Washington came up to the front and he put General Anthony Wayne in charge of the rest of the battle at Monmouth County. That shows you the importance of it. This home is now a part of the National Register, and you can come to this home and visit it. It's been part of the National Register since 1975, and you can see inside that the furnishings are original, the paintings are original, and it was given to a private organization that maintained this home since that time. And if you look directly in front of me, it's now a golf course called Waynesboro. And that was all part of Anthony Wayne's family and his land and what they were all able to do with this land over a long period of time. Very influential in this area. And there are still several Waynes that live in this area. And for me personally, the church that I grew up in, his mother is buried in our church cemetery. And many of my relatives are buried next to Anthony Wayne's family over in St. David's at the Episcopal Cemetery. Read Anthony Wayne, look at his life, look at all the warts he had in his personal life. He was a great character. He was really the General Sherman and General Patton of the Revolution. But we could not have won this war without the great ability of Anthony Wayne to be able to train his men and supply his men and lead his men through many, many very successful battles.
Okay, if teachers have questions, feel free to send them in. I don't have any more at the moment. And I'm trying to remember, are there more? Is this the last video?
I believe there's one more, Gene, but I have a sheet. I have a sheet of chronologically the military career of General Anthony Wayne that I will send to Jen so she could put it up on the website if anybody be interested in seeing exactly what his military career was through the Revolution and all the way out to the Battle of Fallen Timbers.
Okay.
If anybody would like to have that, I'll send it to Jen.
Just send it, Arch. We can get it up there, and then if people want it, they can grab it.
Because I know, Gene, that there'll be thousands of people clamoring for that list of the chronological order of General Anthony Wayne's battles and his successes.
All right, Jen, if you could roll the next one.
We are now on the right flank of the outer line at Valley Forge National Park. This monument is General Anthony Wayne. If we notice that this is now the largest monument in the park, Anthony Wayne was holding the Pennsylvania regiments on the right of the outer line flank. And this statue, Anthony Wayne, is looking towards his home, which we have seen over in Paoli. And it's about 1.5 miles from here. And then the Paoli battlefield is about 1 mile past that. So Anthony Wayne is now looking towards his home. And this is the largest monument in the park. We talked about von Steuben Monument because Pennsylvania has put this monument up. So we want to conclude our program here at Valley Forge with the idea of this is again the high ground. To our left is where Philadelphia is, and Washington now has an outer line defense here at Valley Forge. We started our program with me making a statement that someone said that really nothing ever happened at Valley Forge. It was just a winter encampment. And we have just briefly scratched the surface of many of the stories of Valley Forge and really what went on here for the 6 months and what happened with this army. Washington brings this army out of Valley Forge when the British believed that the army would die here and the revolution would be over. The opposite happened. And we see that this was a crucible in survival. And the reason the army came out of here stronger and this army survived was because of the character of Washington's leadership and him being able to have vision totally focused on the end goal of winning the revolution. Washington, when he is here, finally gets full command as commander-in-chief. And we understand that Congress did not want to give anyone that power because we were fighting to overcome a monarchy. Finally, here, Congress finally gives Washington the full authority to be the commander-in-chief of this army and to all the armies that are fighting the British. And the reason he finally gets command is because of his character. And that is extremely important for us as teachers to share with our students the character of George Washington and now the confidence that Congress has that Washington will not become a dictator, he will not have a military coup, and they fully trust him to be the commander-in-chief of an army that's going to set up a government that we finally get to as in self-government. Washington is the only former president to be called back to be the commander-in-chief of an army after his presidency. That shows you how much trust and confidence they had. I'm reminded that Maya Angelou says in one of her poems that we will rise, and we will rise again. And this Valley Forge story is a picture of how the American spirit rose out of the ashes of defeat after defeat after defeat, and what Washington was able to accomplish here for the rest of the revolution. Washington came here during the Constitutional Convention of 1787 when they had a break, and he came out here with Robert Morris. Now this is many years after Valley Forge, and Valley Forge was totally destroyed by his army. By May of 1778, Washington had to move the army out of Valley Forge across the Schuylkill River. So all this land was pretty much devastated for several years, as the farmers said that they couldn't farm it. Washington comes out here to fish with Robert Morris during the Constitutional Convention, and he now sees a very serene, passive, beautiful fields. And he says to Robert Morris that now that the Valley Forge is serene, and he sees what Valley Forge has become, he said to Robert Morris that we can now be very confident that we are going to have a government as serene and as beautiful as now what Valley Forge is. So we see, again, with Washington's focus on the end goal of having a government, having a government of ourselves and we the people, Washington sees that, and he gets that, and he grasps that here. Washington's army comes out of Valley Forge, almost 21,000 men, which we have already said, it's supplied, it is trained, and it is totally mobilized. Washington cuts across Pennsylvania, he cuts across New Jersey, he takes on the British Army that has now vacated Philadelphia and is going back to New York City to hold New York City. Washington has the last battle in the Philadelphia campaign at Monmouth County Courthouse. The British are horrified that this army that comes out of here is opposite of what they thought was going to come out of here. And so after one-day battle, the British vacate the field and move up into New York because of what Washington's army was by the time it came out of here, because of Henry Knox, Baron von Steuben, Nathaniel Greene, and this man, Anthony Wayne. And so Washington's army that comes out of here does not fight again until Yorktown. And this is how much the importance of Valley Forge is, and that's why I said in our previous spots that I believe that the revolution was won here because of what the army was able to accomplish here on the back of the character of George Washington and what happened here. You know, F. Scott Fitzgerald said that don't talk to me about the doomsayers, because the doomsayers are everywhere. I want to talk to you about America, because America is about the willingness of the heart. And that is the epitome of what happened to Washington's army here because of his leadership and what was being able to be accomplished here because of his vision and his stability and his leadership and his character. So Valley Forge, hundreds of stories here. A winter encampment that is extremely important to our revolution and our winning the revolution. And we go on for several more years until finally in 1783, the British finally signed a peace treaty with us. And it all stems from because of this massive victory, this moral victory that Washington is able to accomplish here at Valley Forge.
Okay, thank you. Again, if teachers have questions, feel free to send them in. Um, but I do think that's a great sort of finish to the whole affair there, Arch, and a lot of important things spoken about. So,
Yeah, Gene, if anybody's asking a question, uh, there are two books that I would highly recommend. Again, we can put those up. This book has only been out a little over a year. It's by Bob Drury and Tom Clavin, and it's about Valley Forge, and it goes into a lot of the stories of Marquis de Lafayette, Henry Knox, what Washington did there, the stories of the French allegiance that came in here. And they also deal also with what Nancy was talking about this morning. Is it Baron von Steuben, or is it Baron D. Steuben, or is it Baron Steuben? And so they talk about that in their book, and they give you a lot of personal character traits of the leadership that was at Valley Forge. And then the other book, it's only been out a year, called Unlikely General by Mary Stockwell. And that talks to the heart and character of Anthony Wayne, and it goes all through his military career. And she also talks a lot about his personal character and who he was and what he was as a human being. And she leaves no stones unturned about the frailty of his character, the faults in his character, and what he did as a person with his family and his children, and Polly, his wife, and Waynesboro. And she's not critical of Wayne. She just shows Wayne who he was as a person, which it makes it even more unbelievable of what he was able to do militarily with training the troops. So I highly recommend those two books, which we can also put up if anybody was interested in.
no, I think that's great. I still don't have any questions, so I guess that is where we will leave it. Go ahead.
If I'd like to, a couple more things that we'll send a link to the teachers about two articles from what Nancy was talking about this morning about von Steuben's Blue Book and the 7 regulations that are still used today from his Blue Book, and an article on it's called 230 Years Blue Book Still Guides the NCOs of the American military, which it's very interesting that teachers can have their students read. So also, Nancy's husband asked a question this morning about why did it take 3 years for the troops to be trained, which I think is a great question. We have to remember that most of Washington's officers had very little or no military background.
Mm-hmm.
So they weren't really able to do any of the training of the troops. And so many of the troops were militias that would come and go, and they were very temporary troops, and they were only going to listen to their local commanding officers, which again, I believe it also shows the character of Washington at Valley Forge. Congress finally gives him total command of the army because they trusted him. And with that trust that they finally put in Washington, he is able then for General von Steuben to train these troops, and Congress was totally confident that Washington would never have a military coup.
Yeah. No, I think it's amazing how he held the whole army together.
Amazing how he was able to hold this all together. And over the years, Gene, Washington adapted his military strategy from a war of posts to a war not to lose.
Mm-hmm.
And ironically, 200 years later, Ho Chi Minh's hero was George Washington. And he read everything he could about George Washington. And Ho Chi Minh used the same strategy against us in Vietnam that Washington used against the British for the rest of the war. Fight not to lose. And you'll wear down the enemy and you'll wear out the enemy. And that's exactly what Ho Chi Minh and the Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese army did to us in Vietnam. just so many hundreds and hundreds of stories that we could go into with Valley Forge and von Steuben and Paoli and just the whole revolution. So it's just fascinating stuff to be able to read it and continue to grasp it.
It is. But thank you for great and good and wonderful stuff as always. Arch always brings interesting things to the discussion about the American Revolution. And with that, just a couple reminders. Tomorrow, we'll hear from Mike Harris at 11 a.m. on the Battle of Germantown. That will be the last session for this program on the American Revolution and the Philadelphia campaign. But just to give you all a heads up, you will be, and Jen, feel free to jump in if you want, or Kim may be doing this, but you'll get a survey regarding the whole program. If you could please complete it and, you know, make sure you hit send, submit, because we actually do look at teacher comments. And this is obviously a new adventure for us trying to do this virtually as opposed to our usual face-to-face, which is really, you know, for veteran teachers who know us is sort of our strength. So, now, Jen, I don't know if you have anything to add.
The survey will get posted on Thursday afternoon. Actually about noon, I think is when I've scheduled it for. And I'm just giving everybody until we're hoping Sunday to get it done just before we roll into our next week's session, if you're signed up for that one as well. But yeah, it'll be posted to Classroom. The link is there, and you'll get a notification that it's been posted to your email.
Okay. And just one quick question came in from a teacher. As some of you may or may not know, one of the things we planned to do once we had to cancel face-to-face this year, and we had enrolled teachers for all our programs at really record numbers. I was closing admissions 2 months ahead of when I had finally done it. I'd finally figured out how to market this stuff and do it really well. And not just me, but staff too here. I mean, we got a fabulous ed staff. But there's a question from a teacher of, you know, next year, face-to-face, you know, assuming we can do it, will the program go as listed, which this year was what, June 27th to July 2nd? And my answer sort of is yes, sort of. You know, I have to go and look. It'll be in that window. It depends on, usually we run programs Sunday to Friday. So whatever would be the Sunday closest to June 27th next year, which is probably June 28th, that's when we'll do it. So many of the programs that we're running this summer, we simply plan to run face-to-face next summer, with the exception, I think, of one of them. But that's it. So unless there's any other questions, everyone have a good day. We'll see everybody tomorrow at 11 a.m. for the Battle of Germantown. And if, again, as usual, if anybody's having tech problems, just hang on till the end and Jen will help you out. And Arch, thank you again.
Thank you, Jim.
Great, good stuff.
Jen, thank you. Can't do
Take
this
care,
without
everybody.
you too.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you very much.